Welcome, my fellow night thinkers. This is Sleepywise, a cozy corner of the internet where restless thoughts slow down and the quiet mysteries of everyday life unravel at their own pace. I know you've had a long day and you deserve a moment of stillness now. Just allow your eyes to grow heavy and let yourself settle into the gentle rhythm of the night. Imagine, if you can, that you are standing at the edge of something very old. The sky above has gone that particular shade of blue that only exists just after the sun has left, soft and uncertain, not quite night and not quite dusk, the kind of blue that asks nothing of your eyes. You are at the shore, and the air here is cool and faintly damp against the sides of your face, carrying with it the deep mineral scent of the sea, something ancient and familiar, like a memory that lives in the body rather than the mind. That scent, as it happens, is not quite the ocean itself. It comes from something living inside it, microscopic creatures too small to imagine, quietly releasing a compound into the air as they go about their invisible lives just beneath the surface. We have all been breathing the traces of their existence without knowing it, and the sea has always been more populated than it appears, more alive in its stillness than the surface would ever suggest. You are not cold. You have something warm with you. A mug, perhaps, held in both hands, the heat spreading gently into your palms and your fingers softening around it without effort. There is something grounding about warmth held in the hands, something that says simply and without needing to be spoken that you are here and you are still and you are safe. And below you, not far now, the water moves. It is interesting to notice the sound before anything else. A long, slow gathering like something drawing a breath. And then the quiet collapse of a wave. The hush of white water thinning across sand, and then the withdrawal. A soft rearranging. A million small grains shifting and giving way and reshaping themselves in the dark. And then silence. And then, unhurried and faithful, it begins again. There is something familiar about this rhythm, even if you have never stood on a beach before. The body seems to recognize it, the way it recognizes rocking, or the sound of rain, or the rise and fall of breathing beside someone sleeping. It is a rhythm that does not ask to be counted or followed or understood, and it simply continues as it has always continued, with or without anyone listening, long before any of us arrived and long after we are gone. The sand itself holds a quiet peculiarity, if you were to notice it. Wet sand, pressed underfoot, briefly firms and whitens around the pressure before the water seeps slowly back in, the grains momentarily locking against each other and creating something almost solid from something loose and shifting. It lasts only a second before it softens and releases again. A small, counterintuitive thing. The way compression can briefly bring order to what is otherwise always moving. The shoreline is a strange kind of place when you stay with it long enough. It is not quite land and not quite sea, belonging to both and to neither. A border that moves and breathes and shifts gradually across the hours as though the ocean is deciding, slowly and without urgency, how much of the land it would like to borrow tonight. Something in us has always been drawn to this edge, to the place where one thing quietly becomes another. What moves so much water so patiently? The question arrives softly, and nothing needs to be understood quickly here. It simply surfaces, the way a question sometimes does in the space between waking and sleeping, not demanding, not sharp, just quietly present. The stars are beginning to appear now, one first, then three, then too many to count, and the water continues its soft returning. The mug is worn. There is nowhere else to be. Let your eyes go soft now. If you are lying down, feel the weight of the blanket across you, that gentle, even pressure, like the world quietly reminding you that you are held. Your shoulders can release, and your jaw can soften, and there is nothing required of your body tonight but this, to rest and to drift, and to let the mind wander slowly, without destination, upward. Because above the shore and above the cooling air and above even the highest clouds moving quietly across the dark in long silver ribbons, there is the moon. It has been there all along, patient and unhurried, waiting at the edge of awareness the way certain things wait, not urgently and not insistently, but with the steady presence of something that has always been there and always will be. We have all looked up at it at one time or another and felt something that was difficult to name. Perhaps you can see it now, or simply imagine it not blazing and not demanding attention, but softly there, the way a lamp left on in another room is there. It has been watching over tides long before anyone thought to wonder why, and long before any of us looked up from the shoreline and began to carry that quiet question into the night. There is something worth sitting with here. The moon is not a small thing made to look large by closeness, and it is genuinely enormous. And yet across the vast distance between us, it appears soft and approachable and almost modest. That same distance, precisely measured, is slowly increasing. The moon drifting outward by a small amount each year, pulled gradually wider by the very tidal forces it creates. It is a relationship quietly reshaping itself across deep time, neither body aware of the change, and both bodies gently changed by it. That distance is crossed by something invisible, something that needs no medium to travel through, no wire or current or sound. Gravity simply reaches, and it cannot help itself. Every object with mass leans ever so slightly toward every other object with mass, and that is simply what matter does in the presence of other matter. It reaches, and it leans, and it pulls, and the other thing pulls back. The moon reaches toward the earth, and the earth reaches back. It is interesting to notice that we don't feel this exchange at all. The solid rock beneath cities and mountains and sleeping fields barely responds, too rigid and too locked together to shift perceptibly under that distant pull, though not entirely. The land itself rises and falls by a small amount beneath the moon's passing, not enough to feel beneath your feet, but measurable and real, a breathing of the solid earth that mirrors the ocean's own. It happens beneath every building and every sleeping body and every quiet field, beneath all of us tonight, equally and without distinction. But water is different. Water is patient and willing and obedient in a way that rock simply is not. And so the ocean, this vast liquid envelope draped across most of the world, responds. It does not resist and it does not question, and it simply redistributes itself, very slowly and very gracefully, bulging ever so gently in the direction of the moon's pull, like a person leaning toward a voice they trust. On the opposite side of the world, another gentle swelling forms, a counterlean and a quiet echo, born from the way large spinning bodies balance themselves across space. What you witnessed at the shoreline, that slow breathing in and out of the sea, was this. It was the ocean in quiet conversation with something 250,000 miles away, each tide a sentence in an exchange that has been ongoing for billions of years, unbroken across all the silence of space. We live beside this conversation without hearing it, and it continues regardless. You might feel the warmth of the blanket now, that soft, even weight across your chest and legs. There is something almost tidal about comfort, the way it rises slowly when you stop resisting, when you simply allow the body to be pulled gently and without urgency toward rest. The moon does not force the ocean, and it simply exerts its quiet presence across the dark, and the ocean, being fluid and willing, responds. The blanket is warm, and your breath is slower now, and the moon continues, as it always has, to lean. Stay where you are. Feel the surface beneath you, the gentle give of the mattress, the way it holds the shape of you so quietly and so without effort. You don't have to hold yourself together right now, and you can let the surface do that, and you can simply be held evenly and without condition, the way the earth holds everything resting on it tonight. You and the shore and the sealed muscles on the rock and all the sleeping things between. There is a shape forming in the ocean. You cannot see it from the shore or from anywhere on land because it is too large and too slow to appear as a shape from close up. From close up, it is simply the tide, simply water coming and going as it always does. But from very far away, from the kind of distance that turns continents into suggestions and coastlines into thin, curved lines, the ocean on the night side of the earth is, right now, very slightly raised. It is a gentle swelling, a long, slow mound of water imperceptible from within, but real nonetheless, drawn upward quietly and patiently by the moon's steady insistence. Imagine the ocean as something almost living in its willingness to respond. The moon pulls, and the water nearest to it rises, not dramatically and not like a wave, but the way a deep breath raises the chest, slowly and completely, and without hurry. The water simply goes where the pull invites it to go, and there is something familiar about that kind of yielding, something the body understands without needing it explained. That is one side of the story. But here, very gently, something quietly surprising waits. On the opposite side of the earth, the side turned entirely away from the moon and deep in its own unlit darkness, the ocean is also raised. Another bulge, almost a mirror of the first, forming in the water on the far side of the world. Two high tides, not one, sitting at opposite ends of the planet like two held breaths, perfectly balanced, as though the earth itself has been very gently stretched along an invisible line drawn through its center. It doesn't feel like it should be true, And if the moon is pulling the ocean toward it, why would the water on the far side rise as well? Nothing needs to be understood quickly here, and the question can rest without urgency and without needing resolution. The answer lives not in the moon's pull alone, but in movement, in the slow, ancient relationship between the Earth and Moon as they orbit a shared center, a point of balance sitting somewhere deep inside the Earth itself. Both bodies are always curving and always falling toward that center, and always in motion. And in that motion, the water on the far side is carried just slightly beyond the grip of the pull, swelling outward in its own quiet response. A counterlean born not from force, but from the geometry of two bodies moving together through space, neither one pulling away and both simply continuing. What remains is symmetry. It is a hidden, elegant symmetry stretching across the entire planet, two gentle risings of the sea, one on each side, like the Earth balancing something precious across both shoulders. We rest on the surface of this symmetry without sensing it, and it holds its shape regardless. There is something else sitting just at the edge of all this. The two bulges are not perfectly opposite, and they are tilted slightly, nudged forward by the Earth's rotation carrying the water along with it. The ocean, in its slow and viscous nature, cannot quite keep pace, and so the bulge leans ahead just fractionally, like a flag catching a breeze it cannot fully follow. This small misalignment has been gradually and patiently reshaping the relationship between these two bodies across millions of years, neither one aware of it, and both gently changed by it all the same. As the Earth turns slowly beneath this invisible shape, any given shoreline passes through first one swelling, then the long middle low, and then the second swelling, and then back again. What feels from the sand like the tide breathing in and out is simply the Earth, turning through a shape held mostly in place by the moon's patient geometry, waiting for each coastline to arrive and then quietly pass through. Perhaps take a slow breath now, in and then out. The mattress holds you evenly, and the ocean holds its shape, and the world turns slow and steady through the night. You are completely still. And yet beneath you, beneath the mattress and beneath the floor and beneath the deep foundations of whatever building holds you tonight, beneath the bedrock and the quiet underground rivers and the ancient compressed layers of stone that have not seen light in hundreds of millions of years, the Earth is moving. It never stops. And it has never stopped. And right now, in the same breath that your body is releasing into rest, the ground beneath you is turning. Not trembling and not shifting unpredictably, but rotating slowly and continuously with a kind of steadiness that only something enormous can maintain. It is the same rotation that lifts the sun each morning and carries it gently away each evening. The same turning that makes the stars appear to wheel overhead on a clear night as though they are moving, when really it is us, all of us turning together quietly through the dark, carried without effort or awareness through the hours. There is something deeply settling in this, if you let it arrive slowly. The stillness you feel right now is real, and the movement beneath it is also real, and both things exist at once without contradiction and without needing to be resolved. We are all, at this moment, being carried through the same dark, beneath the same stars, on the same turning surface. The shoreline visited earlier, that soft edge of sand and withdrawing water, is not sitting passively and waiting for the tide to find it. It is being carried. The coastline is rotating, along with everything else, through the invisible shape the ocean has taken on, that long, gentle stretching of water held mostly in place by the moon's steady pull. High tide is not the ocean arriving at the shore, and it is the shore arriving at the ocean's raised place, a moment of passage and a slow alignment, like a key turning through a lock so gradually that you would never notice the turning itself, only the quiet opening that follows. And then the shore rotates on, past the peak and into the long middle distance where the water withdraws, and the wet sand is briefly exposed to the night air, and small creatures move in the shallow pools left behind. Low tide is not an ending, and it is simply a different place in the turning. Another position in the same continuous arc, the same patient revolution that carries everything forward without hurry and without pause. It is interesting to notice that the Earth's rotation is not perfectly smooth. It contains within it tiny irregular variations, small changes in speed, some caused by the movement of the atmosphere itself, by seasonal winds redistributing their pressure gradually across the planet's surface, and by the slow movement of ice and water shifting weight from one place to another. The length of a day measured precisely enough is never exactly the same twice, and these variations are too small to feel, and yet they are real and continuous, the planet breathing slightly unevenly beneath its own steadiness, adjusting imperceptibly as the world above it rearranges itself season by season. We ride these variations without noticing, and the body simply does not need to. Nothing needs to be understood quickly here. Somewhere beneath the surface of sleep that is beginning to form, the pieces are arranging themselves into something quiet and whole. The ocean's breath, not one thing, but two things, moving together. A distant pull and a daily turning combined into something that feels from the sand simply like breathing. Perhaps reach your awareness, just gently, into the weight of your body right now, the particular way you are settled, the specific pressure of pillow against cheek or blanket across collarbone, or the soft give beneath your shoulders. You have been carried here, not dramatically but steadily, through a whole day of turning. The earth has rotated you through morning and afternoon and evening and into this quiet moment, as faithfully as it has rotated every shore and every sleeping creature and every tide through its own sequence, since before there were eyes to watch it happen. We are not separate from this movement, and we are part of it, small and warm and resting parts of a planet that has never once forgotten to turn. The planet turns through its own elongated sea, and you are still, and both of these things are true. Let your thoughts slow down now, like water finding the lowest place. There is no hurry here and no next thing waiting. Just the soft, familiar weight of where you are, the warmth gathered beneath the blanket, and the quiet of the room settling around you like something patient and kind. If you have a warm drink nearby, perhaps you can feel the last of its heat still lingering in your hands, or simply remember it. That gentle, spreading warmth that asked nothing of you in return and simply was. Turn your attention back one more time to the shore. Not tonight's shore with its cool air and its darkening sky, but something older, something so much older that the mind can only approach it gently, the way you approach a very deep place in still water, slowly and carefully, without disturbing the surface too much. The tide has been arriving and retreating for longer than almost anything else on this planet that we might recognize. Long before there were birds to stand at the water's edge, or grasses to bend in the salt wind, or any creature with eyes to watch the water come and go. The tide was already doing this, already advancing and retreating and carrying with it the fine particles of what had once been solid and whole and unmoving. It has never needed a witness, and it has never required anyone to notice, and it simply continued, as it always has, with the same patient indifference to whether anything was watching. Water, it turns out, is endlessly patient, and patience given enough time becomes something very much like power. Each tide that moves across rock does something almost imperceptibly small, loosening a grain here and carrying a particle there, seeping into a hairline fracture in the cliff face and, in the cold months, freezing and expanding and opening the crack by a fraction too small to witness. Then it returns, and then it retreats, and then it returns once more, finding the same fracture slightly wider than before and pressing a little further in. Over a human lifetime, this would appear to be nothing, the rock seeming unchanged and the coastline seeming fixed and permanent. But the earth does not measure in lifetimes. It measures in millions of returns. And in that sense, we have only ever seen the briefest moment of what the shore is in the middle of becoming. There is something quietly counterintuitive in how this erosion moves, if you let it drift into focus without holding it too tightly. Waves do not simply wear rock away from the outside in, and as a wave strikes a cliff face, it compresses the air trapped in crevices ahead of it. And when the wave pulls back, that compressed air expands rapidly with a force that can fracture stone from within, splitting it along lines that the surface gave no hint of. The sea breaks rock not only by touching it, but by the pressure of what it briefly traps and then releases, a hidden mechanics working invisibly inside surfaces that appear simply to endure and simply to wait. And across all those millions of quiet returns, across that unimaginable accumulation of small and patient actions, the tides have drawn the world into its present shape. The wide, calm shallows of the tidal flats, those gray-brown stretches of soft sediment that appear at low tide like a landscape quietly revealed, are built from what the sea has slowly and selectively decided to leave behind. Fine particles carried in on the flood and settling in the stillness and accumulating layer upon patient layer into something solid enough to stand on. The salt marshes at the edges of estuaries, their roots tangled deep in tidal mud and their stems bending with each returning water, are gardens planted by centuries of gentle insistence, by the tide arriving and withdrawing and arriving again until something living took hold. We walk beside these places or imagine them without sensing the immensity of what made them. The estuaries themselves have been shaped by the same long conversation, their boundaries redrawn so gradually that no single tide could ever be credited with the change. And yet the change is written into every curve and inlet and every shelf of exposed rock and every sea cave worn smooth at its ceiling. The coastline beneath tonight's tide is a memory, a long, slow, accumulated memory of every tide that has come before, a record that was being written long before any of us arrived and will continue long after. And the tide continues, as it always has, to write very slowly and very patiently, without urgency and without end. Let everything go a little softer now. Your breathing has changed, and you may have already noticed, or perhaps you haven't, which is its own kind of peace. The body has begun its quiet negotiation with sleep, loosening its hold on the day and releasing the held things one by one without being asked. The blanket is warm and the room is still. And if there were a mug nearby earlier, warm and held and steadying, you can carry that feeling forward, that particular warmth and that particular stillness, into wherever the mind is drifting now. Because the ocean has one more thing to offer, if you would like to receive it gently. Below the surface, far below the tide's reach, and below even the light that filters down in those pale shifting columns during the day, there is another kind of movement. It is older and slower than anything we have visited tonight, something so unhurried that a single circuit of it would outlast every civilization that has ever risen and fallen on the shores above it, every city built at the edge of the sea and eventually returned to quiet. It has been moving through the whole of human history without our knowing, and it will continue moving through whatever comes after. It begins with temperature and with salt and with the simple, patient fact that cold water is heavy. Not dramatically heavy, not in a way you would feel lifting it in your hands, but measurably and quietly heavier than warm water. And salty water is heavier still. At the poles, where winter presses down with its long, breathless cold, the surface water chills and contracts and grows dense, and eventually, as all heavy things do, it sinks. Not plummeting and not rushing, but descending with the patience of something that has all the time in the world, sliding down into the deep in long, slow rivers that no eye has ever watched form, moving through a darkness that has never known light. And because water displaced must go somewhere, warmer water from elsewhere begins to move to fill the space. Not quickly, and nothing down here moves quickly, but steadily, in enormous flows spanning whole ocean basins, driven by nothing more forceful than the simple difference between heavy and light, between cold and warm, between salty and fresh. The surface and the deep are breathing together across thousands of meters of dark water in a cycle so slow it is easy to forget it is happening at all. It was happening beneath us as we went about our days, and it is happening now as we rest. There is something quietly surprising inside this movement. These deep currents carry dissolved oxygen downward with them as they descend, oxygen that the creatures of the deep depend upon entirely and that would not reach them any other way. Without the slow sinking of cold surface water at the poles, the deepest parts of the ocean would gradually, over centuries, grow still and airless. The surface and the deep are not separate worlds, and they are one long, slow, continuous breath, folded back upon itself across unimaginable distance, each part depending on the other in ways that are easy to overlook from above. And the tide, that familiar daily breathing of the shore that has been with us all evening, reaches down into this as well. not with great force but with persistence, and where tidal currents pass over shallow ridges or underwater mountains, they stir and mix, folding warm layers down into cold ones and lifting cold nutrient-rich water upward toward the light. The daily breath and the century-long circulation are not separate conversations, and they are layered one over the other, each one influencing the other, the way two things can occupy the same space without either one losing itself. What rises from those cold, stirred depths carries the chemistry of elsewhere, minerals and memory that left the surface long ago in another era and another temperature, and are only now returning. The ocean redistributes not just water but time, and nothing needs to be understood quickly here. There is something quietly comforting, perhaps, in systems this patient, cycles that require no urgency and no maintenance and no watching over. The cold water sinks because it is heavy, and the warm water moves because it must, and somewhere in the layered dark, a current that began its descent, perhaps 100 years ago, continues its slow, unhurried journey towards somewhere warmer, carrying with it everything the surface once held. Layer beneath layer, and current beneath current, and breath beneath breath. The ocean endlessly and patiently redistributing everything it has been given. Rest here for a moment. Feel the weight of your own body, the particular unrepeatable arrangement of you, settled into this exact softness and this exact quiet. The warmth beneath the blanket has become your warmth now, the two indistinguishable from each other. The boundary between them dissolved somewhere in the last few minutes without you noticing. Your breath moves without effort and without instruction because somewhere inside you something ancient and unhurried simply knows how, and it has always known how, and it knew long before you did. The shoreline is still there if you would like to return to it. The tide is still moving and still withdrawing and still rearranging the fine sand in the dark, as it has been doing quietly this whole time, whether or not anyone was watching. Let the eyes of your imagination adjust, because the shore is not as still as it first appeared. Between the rocks and in the shallow pools left behind by the retreating water, and in the cracks and hollows of the cliff's wet face, something is waiting. Something is responding. Life, in its quiet and extraordinarily patient way, has arranged itself entirely around this rhythm, around the breathing of the water and around the moon's slow geometry, encoded not in stone or sand, but in the living tissue of creatures who have never once needed to understand what moves them. There is something familiar about that, about being moved by something larger than understanding, about the body simply knowing without being told. The muscles are the first thing you might notice, clustered darkly on the exposed rock, and each one sealed tight against the air. They do not panic, and they do not dry out in the way you might fear for them, and instead they have closed themselves with calm precision, a small world of moisture persisting inside, enough to sustain them through the long hours of exposure until the tide finds them again. They have been doing this for so long that the rhythm is no longer learned, and it is simply them, written into what they are and carried forward through generations too numerous to count. There is something sitting quietly alongside this. Muscles left in complete darkness, with no tidal water and no light and no temperature change, and nothing at all to signal the sea's rhythm, continue opening and closing on their own. The tide is inside them, and somehow, across countless generations, the pattern has been internalized so completely that it persists even when the ocean itself is absent. What was once a response has become an expectation, a deep bodily knowing that no longer requires the thing it was built around, and the body anticipates what the water has not yet done. We carry rhythms like this too, patterns written into us long before we were aware of carrying them. And when the water returns, when that first cool edge of the incoming tide moves slowly across the rock, they open almost immediately, as though they had been listening all along, and as though the listening never stopped. The crabs emerge from their sheltering places, and the small fish move outward into the newly reclaimed shallows, and the shore transforms from stillness into something quietly and precisely alive. Not all at once and not dramatically, but in the gradual way that a room fills with warmth when a fire is lit. Each thing loosening and opening in its own time. Far from shore in warmer waters, the corals synchronize their spawning to the moon, entire reefs releasing their eggs simultaneously. A slow blizzard of life rising toward the moonlit surface, unhurried and extraordinary. The moon does not command this, and yet the coral knows. There is some suggestion, still gently unresolved, that corals may be sensitive to something in the particular quality of moonlight itself, not merely its cycle, but something carried in the wavelengths it casts across the water on the night of spawning. What the body is actually detecting and how remains incompletely understood, and it drifts at the edge of what is known, quietly and without resolution. It is interesting to notice how deeply rhythm runs through living things, not just the tide-entrained creatures of the shore, but almost everything that has ever lived, carrying within it some version of an internal clock, some quiet pulse calibrated to the cycling of the world. Your own body temperature rises and falls across the day without instruction, and certain repairs happen only in deep sleep, and the chemistry of waking is already underway long before you open your eyes. You did not decide to grow tired tonight, and your body, in its deep and ancient wisdom, simply knew. The tide breathes through the living world, and here, in the warm dark, it breathes through all of us. You have come a long way tonight, not in distance but in depth. In the quiet, unhurried way that the mind travels when it is finally allowed to move without destination, drifting downward through layer after layer of something vast and real and older than almost anything that can be named. The blanket is still warm, and the room is still yours, and there is nothing left to follow or understand, only the soft, gradual settling of everything offered tonight, falling slowly into place like sediment descending through still water. The moon was not always where it is tonight. Long ago, so long ago that the number of years would dissolve into meaninglessness if held in ordinary thought, the moon orbited closer, much closer, and the tides it pulled beneath that younger sky were not gentle, unhurried things. They were vast, moving across shallow, primordial seas with a force that reshaped whatever they touched, in a world still cooling and still becoming and still finding its way toward the quieter rhythms it carries now. The days were shorter then, and the earth turned faster in its youth, not yet worn into its long, deep patience, and none of us were here. And yet we are made, in part, from what that world eventually became. But the tides themselves, slowly and gently, wore it down. Each tide moving through the ocean carries within it a tiny amount of friction, water dragging across the seafloor and energy absorbed into the slow churning of so much mass. That friction, too small to feel across any single lifetime or any 100 lifetimes, has been gently and continuously breaking the Earth's spin across hundreds of millions of years. The day has grown longer, and almost imperceptibly, year by year, the planet has slowed, and the energy released by that slowing has been transferred outward through the same invisible gravitational tether, nudging the moon incrementally into a slightly wider orbit and a slightly larger sky. There is something resting quietly inside this. The slowing of the Earth is written not only in mathematics but in stone, in the fossil remains of ancient corals whose daily growth rings record how many days existed in a year when they were alive. Counting those rings in corals hundreds of millions of years old, researchers have found years containing far more days than hours, the Earth genuinely spinning faster, and the day genuinely shorter, and the ocean's breath genuinely stronger. The friction of ancient tides was written patiently into the bodies of creatures who knew nothing of it, preserved across unimaginable spans of time for something to eventually read. We are, in some small way, the something that eventually read it. The moon is drifting away. Not quickly and not noticeably within any human span of watching, but measurably and gently, the ocean's ancient breathing slowly releasing its companion into a larger and quieter sky. The layers are all here now, if you would like to feel them rather than think them. The lunar pull and the turning shore and the sculpted cliffs and the deep cold water moving through the dark and the sealed muscle waiting and the breath that slows without being asked. There are coastlines where the tides still resist simple explanation, bays that fill and empty in ways not fully understood, shores where the rhythm barely registers at all, and the ocean holds its own counsel in certain places, and some of it remains quietly unresolved. The shoreline is dark now. The water still coming and still going, and the sand still rearranging itself in the withdrawal, grain by grain, in the dark. The moon continuing its slow lean across the distance, and the tide breathing in, and the shore turning slowly through the swell and past it. The deep water carrying its long memory through the dark, as it has always carried it, as it will continue to carry it. The water continuing, and the world turning very slightly slower than it did 1,000,000 years ago, and the night holding everything in its patient, unhurried dark. The water continuing, the water continuing. With that, I'll leave you in the quiet embrace of the night. May your thoughts feel lighter and your rest arrive with ease. Until the next quiet, why?